Have you ever looked at the person sleeping next to you? The person whose every breath and feature you have known for 50 years, and seen a stranger? Hello, I'm John from Texas in the United States, your friend who tells real stories. Stay with us until the end of this incredible story. Want to see your story told here? Get in touch with us. This is a story about love in old age, but not one of the sweet, gentle love stories you see in movies. This is a story about the other side of love, the kind that is tested by fire, the kind that demands a strength you never knew you had. This is the story of Elizabeth and Robert. For 52 years, they were a team. Robert was the steady oak, strong and healthy. Elizabeth was the graceful willow, more prone to the occasional ailment, and Robert had always been her devoted protector. Their love story was an epic book filled with chapters of laughter, raising children, and shared dreams. The final chapter was supposed to be their masterpiece. After years of hard work, they had moved into a beautiful retirement community. It was supposed to be their reward, a life of assisted living, where chores were minimal and freedom was maximal. For the first 6 months, it was everything they had imagined. But then, almost overnight, the story took a dark and unexpected turn. It started subtly. Robert, the man with a mind as sharp as a tack, began forgetting things. Not just keys or names, but entire conversations. He, the family navigator, got lost walking back from the community clubhouse. Elizabeth brushed it off at first. A normal part of old age, she told herself. But the decline was rapid and terrifying. They found themselves in the sterile beige office of a geriatrician, a specialist who spoke in calm, clinical tones about cognitive decline and neurodegenerative processes. The diagnosis was a vague but cruel sentence. Robert's mind was beginning to unravel, and there was no cure. The loss of mental capacity was swift. Within a year, the Robert she knew was gone. In his place was a man who looked like her husband, but was possessed by a bewildering fog. Some days, he was placid and childlike, needing help with the simplest tasks. Other days, he was gripped by a paranoid agitation, accusing Elizabeth of stealing his money. His eyes, once full of love, would sometimes look at her with a blank, unnerving emptiness. Their beautiful apartment in the retirement community, once a symbol of their freedom, became a gilded cage for Elizabeth. Her life was now a relentless cycle of caregiving. Waking up at dawn to make sure he hadn't wandered, coaxing him to eat, answering the same questions over and over. This feeling of losing your own identity while caring for a loved one is a painful reality for so many. For the caregivers in our community, how do you hold on to your own sense of self in the middle of a difficult season? Share your wisdom in the comments. There were moments that felt like scenes from a nightmare. One afternoon, he looked at her with pure venom and shouted, "Who are you? Get out of my house!" She stood in her own living room and felt like an intruder. Her identity as Elizabeth was being systematically erased. She was no longer a wife. She was a keeper, a warden, a manager of chaos. This new reality felt like a strange dystopian tale. She was a handmaid to his illness, her entire existence reduced to a single, grueling function. The other residents would see her and offer sympathetic smiles. They'd say things like, "You're a saint, Elizabeth," but their words felt hollow. They didn't see the raw, ugly truth of her life behind closed doors. They didn't see her weeping in the bathroom with the water running so he wouldn't hear. They didn't see the anger that would boil up inside her, a white-hot rage at the injustice of it all, followed immediately by a tidal wave of guilt for feeling that way. Her faith, a quiet but constant presence, began to crumble. She would pray, but her prayers felt like letters sent to a dead address. "God, where are you in this?" she would whisper into her pillow at night. "We lived a good life. We were faithful. Why this? Why are you letting him disappear before my very eyes?" Elizabeth's crisis of faith is so raw and honest. Is it difficult to trust in God's plan when a loved one's suffering seems so cruel and pointless? How does your faith handle these hard questions? The loneliness was the worst part. She was with him all day, every day, but she had never felt so profoundly alone. She missed her husband. She missed having a conversation that wasn't a loop of confusion. She missed being held by someone who knew her name. The epic book of their love story had been slammed shut mid-chapter, and she was left to live in a bleak, unending epilogue. One Tuesday, after a particularly horrific morning where Robert had thrown his breakfast at the wall in a fit of inexplicable rage, Elizabeth couldn't take it anymore. She got him settled in his armchair, turned on the television, and walked out of the apartment. She got into her car, her hands shaking so badly she could barely put the key in the ignition. She didn't have a destination. She just drove. She drove past the pristine golf course, past the smiling seniors doing water aerobics, a world she no longer belonged to. She found herself parked in a deserted corner of a grocery store parking lot, the engine still running. And for the first time, she allowed herself to think the unthinkable. What if I just keep driving? What if I leave this retirement community, this life, this stranger who wears my husband's face, and never come back? The thought was both terrifying and intoxicatingly sweet. The freedom of it, the release from the constant, crushing weight of her duty. It would be a betrayal of every vow she had ever made, a betrayal of their 52-year love story. But was it still a love story if the other person was no longer there to read it with you? She sat there for what felt like hours, the car a potential escape pod from a life that had become unbearable. She was at a crossroads, her entire being screaming at her to flee, while a tiny, exhausted whisper of a conscience begged her to stay. She closed her eyes, her head falling against the steering wheel, and for the first time, she didn't pray for strength or patience or for Robert to get better. She prayed for an answer, any answer at all. As Elizabeth sat in the humming silence of her car, the answer didn't come as a voice from the heavens. It came in the form of an old, dented sedan that pulled into the parking space next to her. An elderly couple got out. The man, frail and hunched, leaned heavily on a cane, while his wife, her face a roadmap of worry and love, gently took his arm to steady him. She guided him slowly toward the entrance of the store, her movements patient and practiced. Watching them, Elizabeth felt a sudden, sharp pang of memory that cut through her despair. It was like a movie reel starting to play in her mind, throwing her back 40 years. She was 35, laid low by a severe case of pneumonia that had left her weak and breathless. Their children were young, the house was chaotic, and she had been terrified. But Robert, her strong, invincible Robert, had been her anchor. He had taken over everything. He learned to cook her favorite soups, his large, clumsy hands surprisingly gentle as he fed her. He managed the children, the house, his own job, and never once complained. The clearest memory was of the long nights. She would wake up from a feverish sleep, drenched in sweat, her body aching. And every single time, he was there, sitting in a chair by her bed, a book in his lap, a cool cloth in his hand. He would soothe her, whisper words of encouragement, and when her fear was at its worst, he would take her hand and pray. His prayers weren't eloquent. They were simple, direct conversations with God. "Please, God," he would murmur, his voice rough with fatigue. "Give her strength. Give me the strength to take care of her. She's my whole world." He was praying for the strength to do for her exactly what she was now contemplating running away from. This reframing of in sickness and in health is so powerful. What do vows or lifelong promises mean to you when they are truly tested by life's greatest challenges? Share your thoughts. The memory was so vivid, so powerful, it left her breathless. The man in the apartment who had thrown his breakfast at the wall was the same man who had held her hand and prayed for her recovery. The stranger with the vacant eyes was the same man who had bathed her forehead and told her she was his whole world. He had not abandoned his post then. How could she abandon hers now? Her anger at God began to melt away, replaced by a profound sense of shame, and then something else, a flicker of clarity. This wasn't a punishment. This was the other side of the vow. This was the in sickness and in health she had so easily promised as a young bride, never truly comprehending its weight. Her love story wasn't over. It had simply entered its most difficult, most demanding chapter. She wasn't a handmaid in a dystopian tale. She was a wife, fulfilling the most sacred promise she had ever made. The tears that came now were not tears of self-pity, but tears of release. She wasn't grieving the man who was gone. She was starting to accept the man who remained. Her prayer changed. She was no longer asking, "Why me?" She was now asking, "God, give me the strength to love him as he is now. Show me how to find your grace in this. Help me to be the wife he needs today." With a deep, shuddering breath, she put the car in reverse. The drive back to the retirement community felt different. She wasn't returning to a prison. She was returning home. When she walked back into the apartment, Robert was still in his armchair, staring blankly at the television. The rage from the morning had passed, leaving behind his usual fog of confusion. The old Elizabeth would have felt a surge of resentment. The new Elizabeth felt a wave of compassion. She walked over, turned off the television, and knelt in front of his chair. "Robert," she said softly. He blinked, his eyes slowly focusing on her face. There was no recognition, just a placid emptiness. She took his hand, its skin thin and papery, and held it in both of hers. "I'm Elizabeth," she said, her voice steady. "I'm your wife, and I love you." He didn't respond, but he didn't pull his hand away. For the first time in a long time, she didn't try to force a memory. She didn't ask, "Don't you remember me?" She just stayed there, holding his hand, offering her presence without expectation. She realized that her battle had been all wrong. She had been trying to fight the disease, to pull the old Robert back from the fog, a battle she could never win. Her new purpose wasn't to fight his illness, but to love the person within it. That evening, she began a new routine. After she helped him get ready for bed, she sat in the chair beside him, the same way he had done for her all those years ago. She remembered the old, worn Bible in their bedroom, the one they had received as a wedding gift. She retrieved it, its leather cover cool to the touch. She opened it to the Psalms, the ancient book of poems and prayers. Her voice was quiet as she began to read. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." Robert's eyes were closed, his breathing even. She didn't know if he could hear her, or if the words meant anything to him anymore. But they meant something to her. The words were a balm to her own wounded spirit, a reminder that even in the valley of the shadow of death, she was not alone. Elizabeth's new routine is an act of faith and love, with no guarantee of a response from Robert. What are some of the small, quiet ways we can show love to someone who may not be able to acknowledge it? Let's share some beautiful ideas in the comments. She read to him every night. It became her own form of prayer, her own way of connecting with God and with the soul of the man she loved. She stopped seeing his blank stares as a rejection and started seeing them as a quiet stillness. She found beauty in the small moments. A fleeting smile when she played his favorite old music, the way his hand would instinctively tighten around hers. She realized that their love story hadn't ended, it had just changed languages. It was no longer spoken in words and grand gestures, but in quiet presence, in patient care, in the simple, sacred act of being there. She also knew she couldn't continue to do it all by herself. Her anger had built a wall around her, isolating her from potential help. The next morning, she picked up the phone and called her daughter. But this time, the tone was different. There was no complaint, no despair. "Hi, honey," she said. "I need to ask for your help. Not just with Dad's health, but with mine. I want to find a support group for caregivers. I think there's one here in the retirement community. Could you help me look it up online?" The request was a breakthrough. She was admitting her own vulnerability, not as a failure, but as a need. She was inviting her children back into their story, not as managers, but as partners. She had a long road ahead. The geriatrician had been clear that Robert's condition would not improve. There would still be hard days, moments of deep frustration and sorrow. But something fundamental had shifted inside Elizabeth. She had found a way to live within the storm. She had stopped demanding that God calm the waves and had instead learned to trust him in the boat. Her love for Robert was no longer defined by the man he had been, but by her commitment to the man he was now. And in that commitment, she was discovering a strength she never knew she possessed, a power made perfect in her weakness. The phone call to her daughter marked the beginning of a profound transformation, not just for Elizabeth, but for her entire family. Her daughter, hearing the strength and vulnerability in her mother's voice for the first time in a long time, didn't just look up information online. She drove over the next day and went with Elizabeth to the community center to sign up for the support group. Walking into that meeting room was one of the hardest things Elizabeth had ever done. It felt like a public admission of failure, a declaration that she couldn't handle her own life. But what she found inside was not judgment, but a circle of weary, understanding faces. She heard stories that mirrored her own. There was a man caring for his wife with Parkinson's, a woman whose husband had suffered a debilitating stroke, another whose mother was lost in the fog of Alzheimer's. They shared their frustrations, their moments of guilt, their small, hard-won victories. They talked about the endless doctor's appointments with specialists like geriatricians, the confusing medications, and the challenge of navigating the senior living system. Finding a community of people who truly understand your struggle can be life-changing. Tell us about a time when a support group, a church group, or just a few good friends made all the difference for you. These were not the idyllic love stories one reads in books, but they were love stories nonetheless, epic tales of endurance, sacrifice, and a gritty, day-to-day grace. For the first time, Elizabeth realized she was not alone in her struggle. Her pain was not a unique punishment from God. It was a shared human experience. This realization was liberating. It gave her the permission to be imperfect, to feel angry or tired without the crushing weight of guilt. She learned practical tips about caregiving, but more importantly, she learned that her own well-being was not a selfish luxury, but a necessary component of her ability to care for Robert. Her family rallied around her in a new way. Her children began to understand that supporting their father also meant supporting their mother. They started a schedule. Her son would come on Saturdays to sit with Robert, giving Elizabeth 3 or 4 hours to herself. She would use that time to attend her support group, take a long walk, or simply sit in a coffee shop with a book, feeling like an individual again. What is the best way for adult children to support a parent who is a full-time caregiver? Share your practical advice and ideas in the comments. Her daughter would call not to ask about Robert's health, but to ask, "How are you, Mom? Really, how are you holding up?" The dynamic had shifted from managing a problem to sharing a journey. Even the visits to the geriatrician felt different. The family went together, presenting a united front. They no longer desperately sought a cure, but instead asked questions about comfort, quality of life, and how to best manage Robert's agitation. They learned to see his health not as a battle to be won, but as a condition to be navigated with as much love and dignity as possible. Elizabeth's days were still long and demanding, but they were no longer filled with the same desperate loneliness. She found a new kind of beauty in her life within the retirement community. She learned to celebrate the small victories. A day when Robert was calm and peaceful was a gift. A moment when he seemed to recognize a song on the radio was a small miracle. A rare, fleeting smile was a treasure. She learned to stop mourning the man he was and to find joy in the man he was now. She continued to read to him every night from the Bible. The words became a source of strength, not just for her, but she believed for him as well. She felt that the stories of faith, of hope in the face of suffering, were reaching a part of him that the disease could not touch, his eternal soul. She began to see their life together not as a tragedy, but as a testament to the vows they had made before God so many years ago. She remembered thinking of their life as an epic book. She had thought this chapter was a cruel, nonsensical epilogue. Now she saw that it was the most important chapter in the entire volume. The earlier chapters were easy to write, full of romance and happiness. But this chapter, this was the one about unconditional love. This was the chapter about the true meaning of in sickness and in health. It was the chapter that, in its own difficult way, most reflected the love of Jesus, a love that serves, that sacrifices, and that endures all things. Elizabeth's realization that this difficult chapter was the most important one in their love story is so moving. Do you believe that the hardest parts of our lives are often the ones that hold the most profound meaning? Her purpose was no longer to be a keeper of her husband's body, but to be the faithful guardian of their love story, to honor it until the very end. One evening, she sat with Robert on their small balcony, watching the sky turn from gold to purple. He was quiet, holding a small, smooth stone she had given him to occupy his hands. She wasn't reading the Bible tonight. Instead, she had an old photo album open on her lap. She pointed to a faded picture of a young, smiling couple on their wedding day. "Look, Robert," she said softly, her voice full of warmth. "That was us. You were so handsome and so nervous." She turned the page, and here, this is when our son was born. You were so proud. You held him for hours. She continued to turn the pages, narrating their epic book back to him. She told him the story of their life, of their love. He gave no sign of recognition. his eyes fixed on the horizon. But as she spoke, his hand, the one holding the stone, reached over and gently rested on hers. It was a simple, perhaps unintentional gesture. But for Elizabeth, it was everything. It was a touch that transcended memory, a flicker of connection from the soul she knew was still in there. She smiled, a real, peaceful smile, and continued telling their story as the last light of day faded from the sky. The story of Elizabeth and Robert teaches us a profound truth about love. It is not just found in the joyful beginnings, but in the difficult, demanding endings. It shows that a life's deepest purpose can be discovered, not in escaping our challenges, but in facing them with grace, courage, and a faith that holds on when understanding fails. It reminds us that caring for another in their weakness is perhaps the ultimate expression of our own strength. If their story has touched you, if it has reminded you of the power of a promise kept, please show your support by leaving a like on this video. It helps these messages of hope reach others who may be walking a similar path. And please subscribe to Stories Beyond 50 to become part of a community that believes in the power of these life stories. Now, we want to hear from you. This is your space. Have you ever been a caregiver for a loved one? And what did that journey teach you about love and about your own strength? How has your faith in God helped you face a situation that seemed impossible? Your experiences are an inspiration, a light for others in the dark. Please, share your thoughts with us in the comments. And if you are not ready to share the details, but you believe in the enduring power of a lifelong promise, just write the single word, love, in the comments below, to honor all those who love until the very end. We read and cherish every word you share. Thank you for your wisdom and your heart. God bless you, and we will see you in the next story.